I'm David Pearson from UC Riverside's Office of Technology Partnerships. It's led by Rosabelle Ochoa. I'm excited to introduce to you today our speaker, Shomit Ghosh, who has recently changed our world at UC Riverside by joining us as our first data analytics advisor. For the last 20 years, Shomit has been a partner at Onset Ventures and has served on the boards of numerous portfolio companies, while increasingly blogging and educating the world about the technology and ethics of the data-centric world that we're living in. He's teaching us that data strategy doesn't have to be intimidating or overwhelming, and with a methodology in place and understanding examples from research and from the marketplace, all of us can just break down data strategy into manageable, digestible pieces. Today, we're going to be learning about data ethics, which is a rapidly evolving topic which includes the moral obligations of gathering, protecting, and using personally identifiable information and how it affects individuals. It's in this educational capacity that the UCR Office of Technology Partnerships is pleased to offer this third of a three-part series of webinars on data analytics by Shomit. Today's talk is entitled Competing via the Four Dimensions of Data Ethics. All three webinars are being recorded and will serve as a resource for entrepreneurs worldwide. If you have questions about our programming or accessing the recordings of Shomit's talks, please write to us at tp@ucr.edu. We'll post this information in the Zoom chat, along with links to the recordings from the first sessions. Shomit, many thanks again for your commitment to UCR and taking the time to be with us today. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, David. Let me share my screen here, and hope everyone can see that. We've overcome the technical difficulties. Great, so thanks for the nice introduction, David, and actually, I've incremented the number of dimensions of ethics we're going to talk about from 4 to 5. So we'll see how that goes. So, and specifically, what I want to talk about also is competing in the data-heavy world against some of those big tech giants with data as your fundamental differentiator. So here are the headlines that we're all familiar with, which is once again, big tech getting into every industry, wielding the weapon of big data, whether it's automobiles, healthcare, or banking, financial services. Data is being used for disrupting each of these industries. And it's being used with quite good effect by the practitioners of big data. So what we'll talk about today is how can a new entrant compete when you're facing up to these Goliaths of data? And I think that data ethics is a really key as a strategic differentiator there. And we'll talk about why that is. And why ethics is fundamental. And there are 5 dimensions of data ethics. Traditionally, we try and understand it in terms of 1 dimension, but there are 5, and all of them are very important. And as an entrepreneur, what can you do to practice data ethics to make sure that ethics is fundamental to your business? And 5 rules to bear in mind. So that's simply it today. So yeah, imagine this. Here you are talking to your best friend, and he or she says, I'd like to introduce you to David. He's brilliant, he's funny, but he has no ethics. Would any of us take this meeting? Of course not, because this is like the most fundamental thing that human beings want is ethics. And I'll even go so far as to say that even among criminals, ethics is important. Imagine that David, Jennifer, and Shomit are bank robbers, and we all go rob a bank together. If we don't have an ethical understanding between us, the moment we run out the parking lot, Jennifer shoots David and Shomit in the back, grabs all the money, and takes off. So ethics is really at the foundation, even among criminals, but ethics is really at the foundation of human interactions. And this is important because data ethics has been something that's been very much at the fore nowadays. And as we've seen, all of the big practitioners of big data in big tech have been cited for privacy violations. And when we think about data ethics, we think of it through the lens of privacy specifically. And certainly this is a big issue, but that's not the only issue when we talk about data ethics. So there are 5 dimensions of data ethics, and every entrepreneur must practice this, large company or small. these really must be central to what it is that you do and what it is that you are. So privacy, of course, we've understood this has been, again, very much in the public discourse. What are the ethics of privacy through data? Also equity. There's been a bit of bias that's been coming out through data that is not balanced, which is having impact on the users at large. But there are additional issues. There's the ethics of jobs. What does automation mean in terms of jobs? The ethics on the impact of the environment of this data-driven world in which we live. And importantly, also the ethics of the free thought that is all of our right, but which can also be affected by the data that we're exposed to. So the top two categories are fairly well defined. The bottom three, not so well defined. Again, they're starting to come more into the limelight, but not so well defined and not so well understood. So we'll talk about all five. So privacy is a human right. In fact, I would say that the first right that you lose under a totalitarian regime is your right to privacy. So this is like one of our most fundamental human rights, is the right to privacy. Data, as it turns out, can be really intrusive. So you can see the paper here on the right-hand side, which was done at Stanford. Facial analytics can be more accurate at detecting sexual orientation than human beings can do by themselves. And at the very last line there, you can see in the article, 81% accuracy in males and 71% accuracy in females. So something as innocent as uploading your picture up to a social media site or elsewhere, you may think that there's no privacy implication here. It's just a picture of what I look like, but it might be interpretable for something that actually is very intimate and something that your friends or family may not know. Not only does this apply to something like sexual orientation, it's even been shown to expose political orientation. So once again, you think about that, your facial image mapped to your political orientation? Yeah, perhaps yes. So this is how intrusive data can be. And we have to be on the guard for this, because there's quite a bit that you can do from the data you collect. So just because someone uploads their profile picture onto your application or website, you can actually figure out a lot about that person, go much more deep than the user may have intended. You can determine their sexual orientation. You can also determine the state of their health. Google and Amazon both have patents on using facial images to help understand the state of your health. As we saw on the previous page, even your politics might be revealed by your facial image, etc. So rule number one on the ethics of data is, just because technology allows you to intrude on someone's privacy doesn't mean that you should. Technology is quite powerful and you can do a lot with what you have, but you should always ask yourself, what is it that you're doing and should you be doing it? And technology affords a lot, but that doesn't mean that we should pursue it. Equity is a human right. This means that all of us should have the right to be treated equally. But because of data being unbalanced, we're ending up with a lot of inequitable results on the internet. So you may be familiar with the technology known as GPTs, and this has been used to do things like text completion. You can, for example, type in, once upon a time there was a little boy, and the GPT will statistically predict what the next word should be, and the next word after that, and the next word after that. Might write your story or an article. So the same sort of technology is applied to facial images. And in particular, what the paper on the right-hand side shows, and this again really highlights the risk and impact of unbalanced data. But instead of feeding it with text, fed with headshot photos of males and females. And then the GPT completed the rest of the image. For about 43% of males, the images were generated of the males wearing suits or career-specific attire. For females, almost 53% were generated wearing bikinis or low-cut tops. And this highlights where the software algorithm may be really, really sophisticated and the software algorithm itself may be great, but if the training data that was fed to that software algorithm was imbalanced in some way, was biased, you end up with biased results. And it's important to note that here, the damage may not have been intentional, but the damage is the same, whether it's intentional or accidental because of unbalanced training data, the impact on the end user is the same. So it goes beyond, hey, this is not what I intended to do. You always have to be on guard for this sort of an inequitable result. And we see this in many places. This was an article that came out about 2 weeks ago from Global Witness, and you can see the excerpt on the right-hand side on the bias that's shown in presenting job ads, across gender, men and women, and very, very highly biased. And this work here actually reflected some work that had been done previously, also in the bias and skew in job ads that were shown through social media because of the bias and lack of representation within the training data set. So this problem has existed within social media for a while. And these articles are actually very telling because companies such as Facebook, of course, are very well versed in machine learning and big data. And yet even there, we can see the manifestations of unbalanced training data having a very damaging effect on the end user. So once again, these sorts of issues, they may not be intentional, but it's very easy just by having the wrong training data sets to produce results which are inequitable. And as we see over here, everything from geographic bias to racial bias to gender bias, solely conditioned on the quality of the data that was fed into the machine learning. So we always need to be on guard on this. The ethics of equity requires that we be paranoid. Are we providing the right training data so that we can constantly produce balanced results and not unbalanced results? I think we'd all agree that the right to income is the right that we should all enjoy. And what this means is the right to jobs. This is a human right. One of the aspects of data is that it actually is threatening employment. And this has been found in academic literature pretty broadly. And you can see a few examples over here. The most recent work on the top right came out of MIT and elsewhere. Oxford, McKinsey, even the chief economist for the Bank of England, et cetera. And what they're talking about here is that automation, because of its ability to replace human labor, actually will eliminate human labor. So automation won't result in all of us living lives of leisure because everything is getting done for us. It may actually have the effect of putting us out of work and potentially getting us destitute. And these impacts are being seen everywhere. So on the far right, you'll see work that's been done on automating agricultural work, in the center, journalism, on the left, accounting. So both blue-collar jobs as well as white-collar jobs are under threat from automation. And there's an ethical issue here because once again, we all have a right to income and employment. And if that employment is taken away and there's no means of actually replacing that income, where does that leave us? The automation has continued a pretty steady march across a range of job functions. On the far right here, we see that there's been an invention of a burger flipping robot, which of course can work 24/7, never goes home, never gets sick. And you can operate it for $3 an hour, but it eliminates a job which might pay $15 an hour. And what is the impact of that? If fair employment is a human right, should we not consider the impact of too much automation? Which leads me to this possible way of how we view data and automation, and thereby also the ethics. Iron Man, fully automated, sent here to replace us. Excuse me, Terminator, fully automated, sent here to replace us. And Iron Man, which is an augmentation of human capability using technology. Which of these models is a better model for us? Which of these is more sustainable? And what should the ethics of automation be? And in fact, if automation eliminates too many jobs, we can actually expect both a societal backlash and also a regulatory backlash. Because if over-automation is killing jobs, we are not going to let our elected leaders go without implementing policies that help reduce that job loss from occurring. So again, should we pursue the Terminator model, or when we think about automation and the ethics of data, should we not try and pursue Iron Man solutions, solutions that are data-driven but really augment human capabilities and not replace human capabilities? Clean environment is also a human right. And when it comes to technology, much of this has been well documented, everything from the energy and water requirements of semiconductor manufacturing to also the e-waste problems that are created. So this has been well documented in the academic literature, a couple of examples here. But what I'll draw attention to here is the carbon impact of computation. And nowadays, what goes on when you think about AI, we really highlight the accuracy of the AI versus the energy efficiency of the AI. So the paper on the left-hand side, in particular, the bars you see there, the orange bars, are we, in our academic publications pursuing artificial intelligence, are we focused on the accuracy, or are we focused on the energy efficiency of those models? Overwhelmingly, what academic publications cite is the accuracy of the AI that we're doing. So if you look at the orange bars and how much larger they are than the green bars, just showing that we prioritize how accurate a machine learning model might be without giving much thought to how much energy might that be consuming. And this is actually pretty broad. So we always focus here on accuracy, and you can see what is the environmental footprint of training a natural language processing model. So an NLP model training at 626,000 pounds of CO2 versus a car having a lifetime consumption of 26,000 pounds. So, and whoops. So, what we're showing here is that we're prioritizing accuracy, but, perhaps at the expense of climate change. What we might be thinking about, what is the ethics of the model that we're running? Is it consuming more power than the benefit that it's producing? And if so, we should actually reconsider whether we harness that ML model or not. As we know, the ethics of the environment, the impact falls particularly hard on the developing world. So the impact of climate change is particularly devastating for the world's poor. So once again, let's consider overusing AI when the benefit that we derive from that isn't equal to the impact on the environment that we cause. So this too is an ethical issue within AI and data. And finally, thinking your own thoughts is a human right. And as we've seen in AI and data-driven models, there's a great opportunity to influence how people think. I'll cite the paper here on the left-hand side, which is work that was done by a social media company to spread emotional contagion. And you'll see there the third line down, spreading emotional contagion without the users being aware of this. So what are the ethics of influencing people's thought without them being aware of the fact that their thoughts are being implemented? Our thoughts should be our own, should not be subject to this sort of overt influence from profit-earning companies. And the effects of this sort of use of data can be pretty profound. And a couple of the citations are on the right-hand side. And the ethics of this is pretty broad. The challenge here is that there are ways of using data to actually drive the polarization of human societies. So if you see what the work that was done on the left-hand side, this was actually engineering words into social networks to drive the virality of those messages. And as was found in the research that was done here, the effects were particularly profound within groups, so within polarized groups. Once again, here you can see about injecting false memories into people's thinking. Once again, that really resonated with their existing political beliefs. So once again, polarization, and this can be seen elsewhere too. This ability to use emotion and to capitalize on it within groups of people who have very similar beliefs. Once again, driving the polarization effects. We've seen the impact of this recently through the pandemic and also in recent political campaigns. And this is the danger in data, is the ability to influence people's thoughts. The damage from data can be pretty widespread. Recent revelations by the Wall Street Journal about Facebook and Instagram and the toxic effect on teenage girls, and also work that's been done on triggering things like Tourette's syndrome using data. So once again, the damage here can be pretty profound, and these are the sorts of things that we need to be aware of. So rule number 5 here is our most precious right is to think what we wish, not to have that influenced by anybody, least of all by a profit-earning company. And never should we abridge that right for our users to be able to think what they wish. So what should entrepreneurs do? Certainly we can conform to the regulation, but I think self-regulation is more important. Regulation, unfortunately, will never keep track and be equal to the technological capabilities that are out there. So the most important thing that we can do is, regulation aside, is as entrepreneurs or as innovators, always to exercise self-regulation across all the dimensions of ethics. One simple thing is the cocktail party test. So if you can't ask someone a question in polite conversation, you shouldn't be ferreting out that same classification by the data trail. So if it's not polite to ask somebody a question in an informal social setting and get an answer to that question, never should you try and extract an answer to that question by a data correlation. And also, it's important to think about all of these rules of ethics and the broader meaning of them always in your decisions. So for example, if job loss fueled by a particular data-driven automation is causing a bigger human impact on society through the automation, is it worthwhile? And if we're replacing jobs and cannot replace that income for the people affected, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. So let's think about an Iron Man approach and not a Terminator approach. Similarly, is your technology model causing a bigger carbon footprint than any benefit received? If you're trying to provide transportation, what do you need? Do you need a large SUV, or do you need a bicycle to accomplish that task? And if the problem can be the problem can be solved via a straightforward and simple and low impact solution such as a bicycle, let's do that. Let's not over-engineer technology just because we can. Let's not achieve very high accuracy in AI just because we can at the expense of carbon footprint. As a bonus rule here, certainly there's no such thing as a comprehensive ethics policy. The analog here would be automobile traffic. We have lots of rules, lots of regulation that govern traffic and how we drive in traffic. And there are even informal social practices. All these things are out there: laws, rules, regulations, social practices. And yet we still end up with accidents. So every time we go out on the roadways, we're always watching for potential accidents from people either obeying the laws and doing something accidentally, or disobeying the laws and causing havoc. We always have our eyes open. The same needs to happen within data. We should always assume that we're doing something wrong. And it's only through this sort of constant vigilance that we can try and walk the straightest and narrowest path when it comes to data ethics. So there is no comprehensive policy that we can have. It's only by having this constant vigilance over our data sets, over our algorithms, et cetera, to make sure that we're always doing things via an ethical way. Ethics, if we do it right, then this becomes your fundamental and most powerful differentiator versus the giants that are out there. One of the things that all the data giants have in common is that they've all have their issues and challenges on the data ethics side. So this is perhaps your strongest differentiator as a startup or a new entrant into the field, is to be able to say that you're an ethics first business. And with that, Thank you very much. Questions?
Thanks very much, Shomit. You know, I think we all think a little bit, or think about the design of data collection. It seems to me that what you pointed out is that we need to integrate into our thinking a rapid reaction to what the impact of that data is. And you can, project all you want, but somehow you've got to be sensitive to the ancillary unexpected impacts that go on. And I draw an analogy to, one of my responsibilities is running a laboratory in the incubator. And we spend a lot of time on safety issues, trying to ensure that we have thought through everything. And that's never possible, but at least there's an awareness that you need to be constantly examining from different directions what you're doing. How can that be trained, that sort of thinking be trained into the business community?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I think, first of all, and that was the reason for trying to highlight each of these dimensions of data ethics, is so that we can start to understand it broadly. And I think heretofore, because the discussion has been so limited to privacy, that becomes our only area of focus. And if we understand that there are also issues of equity, and I think the job loss issue is really a major one, we should be giving consideration to that. The environmental impacts, even the behavioral economics of influencing people's thoughts, all of these things need to be thought about. And it's only through an awareness of knowing that these are the additional ethical impacts that are possible that we can start to try and act on it in a deliberate way. And the discussion so long has been focused on the privacy issue alone. I think this leaves the other issues unaddressed. And I think that's the challenge. So, one of the hopes and goals for this talk today is just to try and alert people on the additional factors that come into play, so that they can start to think about themselves as they embark on their own projects.
Shomit, I was wondering if you could give us a greater sense of hope. I mean, your last slide brought it together, what I thought was the title, which was, how do we leverage ourselves against the big guys? Is that happening more? I mean, are we seeing more and more cases where people are becoming aware that they are being intruded upon and more suits are being filed? Are there new rules being written? Is it happening at a faster pace than it used to in the past?
Yeah, I think so. I think though still the focus is very much on the traditional aspects of this. So privacy, for example, I've seen very little except in the academic literature about energy impacts. For example, I've seen very little, unfortunately, even on the job loss aspects. And I think we need to think about these things, because for any company, what's important for any company, the most important thing is sustainability. Will you be around in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What makes a company unsustainable? Of course, unethical behavior makes you unsustainable. And even if it's not ethical, let's say a particular sort of automation is causing massive job loss, and there's nothing unethical in it, except maybe job loss is an ethical issue. Maybe we shouldn't be having that kind of damage in society, in which case it will end up being regulated against. So if it gets regulated against, your company is then out of business, because the thing that you enabled has now been deemed unsustainable by the government. So these are the things we need to think about. And I think it is important, because for all of us as human beings, again, there's a certain set of human rights that we expect and deserve. And this includes things like privacy and the freedom to think your own thoughts, and also the right to have an income. So if these are all rights, these are all ethical issues, then we as entrepreneurs and startup company founders, things like that, we have to make sure we provision these with our solutions. It is very much more in the fore nowadays. People are starting to think about it, but I think it needs to accelerate, because technology is moving very quickly, and it's not clear to me that our awareness of some of these technological advances is keeping pace.
I'll ask another question, and that is, can you give us an example or two of competitive commercial situations where ethics has trumped business?
So I think the best example would be the world that probably most of us were born into, which is back in the 60s when pollution wasn't quite such a big issue back then, right? And I think famously the river that ran through Cleveland caught on fire because of all the industrial effluents that were being dumped into it. Because at the time we thought, hey, we can build, I don't know, these ballpoint pens, these ball bearings, these automobiles, whatever, much more cheaply if we don't worry about the pollution. So we'll dump it into the rivers, we'll burn it into the air, we'll dump it into the surrounding fields, whatever. And then sometime around the 1960s, I think we started to come to the awareness of, that cost in society is not balanced by the benefit to our pocketbooks. So yeah, we can get the ballpoint pens or the ball bearings or the automobiles more cheaply if we pollute, but the cost of society way exceeds the cheap product. So let's sacrifice the ultimately cheap product for a cleaner environment. So we've made that decision consciously. So let's do the ethical right thing, even though it hits our pocketbooks, because we realize the long-term impact is way more expensive. So just as we discovered that industrial pollution was an ill, I think we're going to discover that, I don't know what the right term for it, but data pollution maybe might be a similar ill, and that we also need to proactively address.
I would like to make a comment, Samit, about one of your ethical dimensions. I mean, you talk about the right to income, and we are very worried that automation is going to remove jobs from the system. But if you think about a company starting up, and they are developing a product or method or whatever, I don't think that the first thought is what I'm doing going to remove one job from the system? Because if you start thinking in this dimension, then you are cutting innovation at the root. So it's very difficult for somebody starting up thinking about the social dimensions of what you do, because if you the picture that you gave us today, it has an implication. Then I'm not going to do many things that they are in my mind, for instance, right? So my first thought is, we are aware of all these ethical implications of what we do, but not to the point in which innovation may be a problem, right? So then the second dimension of my thought is, well, if we go ahead and we remove jobs from the system because automation, then we have to start thinking from a public policy point of view, and to start asking ourselves, what can we do as a society such as the right to income is preserved? And for me, it's not very surprising that the big entrepreneurs in tech are the ones who are advocating for a lifetime income, because they see that if we don't go into this dimension, then we will have a mass of people with no income, with no job, and that could be the grounds for a social revolution. And I don't want to be very dramatic, right? But you see that within the technology world, there are already advocates for this right to income because they want to preserve the right to innovate.
Yeah, no, I think this is it's a complex topic, and I don't know that I have an answer to it, but I think this is something that we need to think about so that we do it deliberately and we don't get into difficulties. So again, trying to think of an analogy to this, imagine this was, I don't know, 100 years ago and we invented plastic. Hey, we invented this great thing. It never degrades and never biodegrades. Let's build everything with it. And now, of course, we're drowning in plastic waste, right? And if only we'd known back then, we'd maybe thought through, well, what's the impact of having something that's not biodegradable? And should we be replacing every product with something that's built with plastic? Maybe at the time, with the benefit of being able to think forward a little bit like that, we might not have done the willy-nilly transition into a plastic-based economy. So in the same way, yeah, certainly we have to keep innovating, and we can't always think about, well, will this innovation take out a job or not? But this is something I think we need to keep in the back of our minds, because if we don't, we might actually put ourselves, without any foresight and forethought, we might end up causing some severe damage to ourselves. So yeah, again, I don't think that there's a silver bullet answer to this, but it should be something that we have in the back of our minds. And there are like I always think about heavy equipment operators. So in the US, there's something like 4 million people who drive buses, trucks, things like that, which are like heavy equipment. And if we replace all 4 million with self-driving vehicles, what's the impact on not only those 4 million people, but all the people that they support in their families and the secondary industries that are supported? And if we can't find a replacement to that income, maybe we ought to go slow in trying to automate driving heavy equipment around. Otherwise, I think the long-term ramifications might be kind of profound. But I think this is a kind of Lori, for your background with economics, you'd be the perfect person to be able to sort this kind of issue out.
Yeah, there is room for public policy and
Yeah.
One thing that's been interesting in our Department of Technology Partnerships is that we've been having some really robust discussions about portfolio management. Which companies do we want to have in our portfolio that we're helping grow as startups for the Inland Empire? And we do have a criterion, and Shomit knows because he was suggesting, why limit it to having weighting similar to other factors? Maybe it should be 5 times more important, and that is, what's the job creation and job retention potential of the company? And so we, in fact, have implemented that already as a heavy weighting for the benefit of the Inland Empire over pure technology issues. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but we're addressing that issue.
Yeah, and Joe was asking, is fake news part of the data pollution? Yeah, absolutely. And as we've seen in some of the examples that I cited, fake news can be engineered to have maximum impact. And it can become very viral because you can engineer it to become viral. And herein lies a danger, and particularly because it echoes within polarized audiences, which really heightens the impact of it. And UBI may be a solution. I think this is also something that people have been looking at. So UBI may be a solution, but complex issues here are altogether, because if all of our jobs are automated, then where do the taxes come from, right? And what happens to consumer consumption if all of our jobs have been automated, and the UBI that we get in return is far less than what we would have gotten had we been fully employed. So I think the societal impacts and the economic impacts are pretty profound, and bear some forethought before we go too far.
So Shobit, these are all great points, I think, from maybe like a societal or public policy point of view. But I'm thinking also from, if you think about it from a small startup or a company perspective, it seems to me, maybe if, I'm taking a cynic view here, it seems to me that at least in the short term, to engage in these 5 areas of ethics would put a company at a disadvantage, maybe again in the short term, right? So one question is, is that the case? Maybe how do you overcome it? And secondly, are there examples of companies that you can think of who are successfully competing, who are engaging in these 5 areas that's out competing others because they are doing the right thing? But the cynic in me says, at least in the short term, the answer is no. So we look at like DuckDuckGo, right? It's supposed to protect our privacy, but Google still, trumps or outweighs. Or you think of things like Clearview, I think AI, right? Where, boy, they are probably the leaders in this field. And last I heard, there's 18 different organizations have signed up for this, and so from that perspective, they're doing better by shorting, right, some of the dimensions you talked about. So let me stop there and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think personally, I think that for dimensions such as privacy, no company can compromise. I think morally we wouldn't feel right about that. You and I wouldn't, being involved in a company that was compromising people's privacy. You and I wouldn't feel comfortable working in a company that was using unbalanced data and producing results that weren't delivering equity, right? If we were shortchanging certain demographics, we would not feel good about it. So I think it's a moral imperative for us. And I think ultimately this is what consumers want. We're starting to see a backlash against social media, for example, exactly because of this. And what are the long-term impacts on those businesses because of the backlash that they face from society and ultimately from the government? And what does that mean in terms of how sustainable those companies may be in the long run? So I think you need to, one needs to do it because it's the right thing to do. I think if all of us were involved in a startup, we would be doing things the right way. We wouldn't be saying, hey, we can make money by intruding on people's privacy. Let's do it. I think we just absolutely would not do it. So we wouldn't do it because it's morally not right. And I think long term, which is why I began the discussion with, think about, would you take a meeting with somebody who's positioned to you at the outset for being unethical? Would you go to a restaurant if you knew that, well, they're going to shortchange me on the change, they're going to adulterate my food? The food is great. It's a Michelin-starred restaurant, but they're going to shortchange me on my change. They're going to adulterate the food with lower quality ingredients. They might even take pictures of me when I go to the bathroom. Would we go there? We wouldn't go there because the business is unethical. It doesn't matter how good the food is or how cheap the prices may be. We just wouldn't go there. I think truly it is the ultimate differentiator. So for companies getting started today, how do you lay the foundation of being competitive and competitive against some of the giants of big tech? And what might a vulnerability be for those giants of big tech, other than the fact that, they've all had their share of issues with privacy? So, I think that some of these issues may be a little bit more abstract and maybe longer term, for example, the job loss, but some of the others have immediate impact. Privacy, equity, even energy impact, those things have immediate impact. And so I think startups cannot neglect those, should not neglect those.
Thank you, Shomit, for all the wonderful insight. I just have a quick comment to make. So after hearing all of your presentation about these multi-dimension of data and ethics, I think the main topic that you're trying to say is humanity versus efficiency of all these workloads, because machines and data don't lie, and that just really eliminates the human aspect of our society, right? So do you think this, because of how data is always so important to our lives, do you think that we should bring humanity into these data, like maybe have some verified errors, or like just to make this more human being rather than everything is all machine and everyone is not allowed to make any mistakes, and that has like a huge impact on our society and like children growth as well?
Yeah, really a great point, Peng-Chi. And and we're seeing this now. Even Amazon is now coming in for criticism because they're doing the way they manage their warehouses is very hard edged, right? Because it's all driven by the data, and people get dismissed from their jobs via an app. There is no human interface, or people can't go to the bathroom, all sorts of things like that. So it's important that we keep our humanity in the equation versus sacrificing everything for the sake of efficiency. If you wanted to have a business be completely efficient, the business shouldn't pay its workers. Everyone should work for free. Right, but of course, that's not sustainable. It's not humanitarian, right? We shouldn't all work for free just to make the business hugely profitable. Shouldn't all work for free. So we have to bear in mind that humanity trumps all, and that's the thing which defines us as a species and a society. And it shouldn't fall victim to merely economic efficiency. And data can drive us to economic efficiency. So, so there's a line to be trod there. There is a red line not to be crossed.
Right, just to follow up, with all these data, data is basically power to all these companies, right? Like if you have an accurate model of data, you can theoretically make a successful business. Or do you think these companies will give up this power to, just for the sake of humanity? Like where will this go basically? And how can
Yeah.
we limit it?
Yeah, no, and it may be that this is just an idealistic pipe dream, but I hope not. I think that we all do have to work toward a common good. Otherwise, it becomes a very predatory world in which we live. So I hope that we can work toward a common good. And Joe makes a comment here, which I think is related, is that unless there are penalties, people won't conform, because if you can make money from it, then why not do it? Yeah, I think that the penalties are important. I would say one needs to go beyond cash penalties, because what's most valuable to these data-driven businesses, their data. And it doesn't help to fine them $5 billion when they have a profit of $50 billion, right? Why not make them delete their data? If you want to make it really painful, it's like otherwise, I catch David having robbed a bank. I say, hey, David, you robbed a bank. That'll be a $50 fine. And he'll say, yeah, here's your $50 fine. And I'll just run off with the rest of the loot, right? But that's not how it works. You have to deprive him of something which is very important to him. It's not the $50 you might have robbed from the bank. It's, David, we're going to deprive you of your freedom. We're going to put you in jail for the next 6 years, right? So can you make the penalty for privacy violation, for ethical violations, similarly punitive on these data companies? And what is it that they value the most? It's their multidimensional, hyperdimensional data. So if you commit a transgression here on intruding on people's privacy or some other ethical issue, force those companies to delete data, and that'll get their attention instantly, right? So
I definitely agree.
yeah. So anyway, but I think that would be an effective. I would like to think that would be an effective punishment, which would cause these companies to conform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm actually like a fourth year business student here at UCR, but I'm noticing a lot with my friends and on social media as well. A lot of the ideas and trends are focusing on more getting a life, right? Having a life outside of the work, outside of having a disconnect period. So do you think by educating our whole population, saying, bring the humanities back, right? So we allow people to make mistakes, allow people to be different, allow people to think differently. Would that like limit the amount of data that we contribute to all these large companies, or how do we help this basically? Sorry, I'm taking a lot of your time.
No. That's probably a question that's too wise for me to answer. But this is a good question to ask. Yeah, I think maybe focusing on our humanity is really important. I think also disengaging from something which is abstracted from that humanity, which is data and machine learning and AI. Separating from that once in a while is also good. Not surrendering data streams into that machinery is also good. So good question, probably a long discussion, and definitely I'm not wise enough to give a wise answer.
Thank you so much.
Any last questions for Shomit? If not, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, Shomit, for this 3-part series on data dimensionality. And we're looking forward to whatever the next series is that you're able to bring to us. We appreciate the time and the insights, and we all have a huge job in terms of bringing the learnings from this session to the companies that we're helping with, to our own lives as well. So I've been very inspired by your thinking, as you can see with all of the companies that I've been bringing to your doorstep to talk about what data means to them or can mean to them. So many thanks. Thanks to the participants for today's session as well.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye now.